This session is about the secrets of e-commerce in Asia Pacific with a case study on Levi's. Presenting here from Sing Post is Tim Lee. I'll have him come up to the stage now.
It's great to be here. I don't come that often to Australia, but whenever I come down under, I have a great experience. That when I came in 2000, I was invited by Visa to a 3D Secure Summit to help them design Verified by Visa and what is also known as MasterCard Secure Code now. And it turned out really well. And in fact, they asked me to lead the group for them, the whole global e-commerce group for them the following year. And I spent 6 years working for Visa, crisscrossing between Silicon Valley and Asia and living everywhere in between, just trying to really understand what's going on in Asia Pacific e-commerce. And through that time, I've seen a lot of ups and downs. I've worked closely with the current CEO of Alibaba Group for many years during their scrappy formative years. And so what I'd like to talk to you about today is all those ups and downs that I've experienced in the last 13, 14 years here in Asia Pacific, and why I believe 2014 is really the inflection point. It's really the year of e-commerce in Asia Pacific, as should be no surprise given the Alibaba IPO, but it's really beyond just what's going on in China, and that's really what I'm going to focus on today. And so we have a lot of content to cover, to give you a little glimpse of what's going on in terms of where I'm coming from now. So I actually am currently at Sing Post Group, and I'm going to get a little help from the guys here. The pointer's not working. So there we go. So I'm currently at Sing Post Group. It's a little odd. You may find that I'm coming from a post office and speaking to you about e-commerce. The roots of this is that we are now much more than a post office. Sing Post is actually not only the #1 post office in the world, it is rated the #1 post office because we've actually graduated beyond just doing the post. So 5 years ago, we started by going into the logistics business. We bought a logistics company called Quantium, and we found that because mail volumes have been declining ever since the invention of email, we need to go beyond just delivering the mail. We start delivering packages. And 2 years ago, we formed an e-commerce group. And in this group, we actually do full-service, end-to-end e-commerce. So what that means is we actually not only do the last-mile delivery and the warehousing, but we do the e-commerce platform, which is, of course, Magento. And we also pick up the phone and do the customer care, emails, and do the digital marketing as well. So we integrate that completely for our clients across all of Asia, from down under here all the way up to Korea and everywhere in between. So we're a one-stop shop for our clients. We're B2B, our focus is B2B, and so far our clients like that. We have, in the last 2 years, signed up a number of the big names. You can see up there some of the ones that we're working with now, and we've even got a few more that are in the pipeline, and a few that we can't mention, including some that we've deployed down here. The world's largest Japanese retailer, for example, is another one of our clients. So that's a little glimpse of what we're doing. We've been quite successful at it, and as a bit of a validation, Alibaba, this past about 5 months ago, they put in $250 million into us, and so they own about 10% of our group now. So we're part of the Alibaba ecosystem, and that also gives us a little more visibility into what's going on across Asia Pacific. So what we're going to focus on today is really, if you're thinking about Asia Pacific, where do you go? When do you go? How do you do it? And who do you work with? So that's really the big picture. It's not an easy subject, but I'm going to take a more global perspective at it and focus really on how you look at each market within Asia Pacific. So if you look overall from an e-commerce penetration standpoint, you'll find that in the whole world, Asia is actually, of course, got the big numbers. If you look at this is the actual retail volume, non-e-commerce, just overall retail sales around the world on each continent here. And you'll see that Asia's got 4.3. It's actually the biggest market. Not a big surprise there. And the e-commerce penetration, which is the smaller orange bar there, in 2013, it is 4.3%, and in 2018, it's 7.6%. So we're going to really hone in and focus on breaking that down amongst all of the countries within, all the major countries within Asia Pacific. And look at how that compares to North America, to Europe, to Latin America, and you can see that there's quite a diverse pool of countries that we're working with here, different markets. So the key question in the first part of my presentation is, where do you start? And usually the topic of conversation focuses around China, where a lot of the press has been focusing on and where a lot of the opportunity is. So obviously China here is 1.8 trillion. Out of that 4.3, it's already 40% of the market. So you can't really ignore China. It's hard to ignore, but it's also a place that you can easily have your downs instead of your ups. And so the key in China is deep localization. What we find is that Chinese consumers, of course, most of them just speak Chinese, and when they visit international sites, they are really not visiting these sites as often as all of us would like. They like to go to Chinese sites. So 81% of Chinese consumers do not actually visit international monobrand. What I mean by monobrand is sites like Adidas, sites like Uniqlo, these brands that are essentially selling their own products. So there's not enough localized content on the international sites, so they like to go to their own Chinese sites like Tmall. So the information that you develop on your sites, if you have a monobrand, for example, it has to be localized. So we're finding that the information, even brochureware, is influencing the transactions quite a bit. And so the number we found is that that 39% of consumers are actually influenced by the main branded site. This is partly because a lot of the sites a lot of the goods in China are fake goods. And because they're not authentic, consumers are looking for what are the latest styles, what are the latest releases from the big brands, the big fashion retailers, and they want to keep up with the authentic goods as opposed to the fake ones. So as a means of a channel of communication, it's really critical that your branded sites are up to date and localized for the Chinese community. So in China, we've also found that consumers really like to shop from local shipping, local warehouses, and there's a little mix on depending on which product. If you ship the products that are authentic too quickly, if you ship it within a day or two, for example, Chinese consumers actually think that it's actually a fake product because it's coming too quickly. And if you repack it and you actually have a local warehouse, you can even repack it with newspaper that's coming from Hong Kong, and that will actually add to the perception that this is an authentic product because it's actually coming from outside of China. So there's a lot of tricks in China that you can apply when you think about deep localization, and it has to be localized at that moment because it's 2014. These are the tricks that work this year. Next year, it could be different. And so there's a lot of, there is a transition that we've seen in Asia Pacific between the parcel forwarding model, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, especially down under here, and the localization model. So we think that this transition is actually going to be happening such that the parcel forwarding model will be diminishing over time. We have a lot of visibility into that because we actually have a parcel forwarding service ourselves. It's called vPost, and so we don't see that as a long-term solution. We see deep localization as the long-term solution. So the problem with China is that it's vast, it's big, and most likely what you're going to experience in China is that it is so big that you will just feel like you're just a small boat in the vast ocean. And that is the reality. If you try to go too early into China and you're not ready, we've seen a lot of companies go in and essentially you're trying to boil the ocean. You're trying everything and you're investing millions of dollars, and it's really a positioning game. You're not doing it for ROI. You're doing it oftentimes just to position your brand, protect your brand, experiment, and build a roadmap for the future. So the question comes back to, is China the right strategy to go first? It depends on your objectives, and so I'll put a question mark on whether that's China first is the right move for you. The next major market in Asia is Japan. Japan, if you look at it, the numbers are pretty big. They've got 1.1 trillion in retail sales, so pretty sizable compared to China's 1.8 already, even though the population is much smaller. But what you'll face in Japan is that there are a lot of mature, large keiretsu or conglomerates that dominate the marketplace there. And Rakuten is very strong there. If you know how to position yourself and you can do it with scale, you can enter Japan, but it's usually not the place that we recommend. Japan always has its idiosyncrasies, and it's always a difficult market to get just right as well. So we don't really recommend Japan being the first place that you go. It is a good place to go over time if you have strength elsewhere in Asia Pacific already. The next big country is India. India also has its idiosyncrasies. It's, of course, 1.2 billion in population as opposed to 1.3, but its retail sales is down to 0.4 trillion, which is a small fraction, less than a quarter of Chinese retail sales. So it's and the actual e-commerce penetration is below 1 right now. So there's a lot of reasons for that. First is because cross-border transactions are very difficult. So the parcel forwarding model that you're familiar with here, it doesn't really work in India because of customs and duties. In India, if you map out all of the customs and duties across all of Asia Pacific, and throw in the US in there as well for comparison, you'll see that we're quite spoiled down here. You don't have to pay taxes for anything below 100 Aussie dollars here. And so that's not the case elsewhere in Asia. If you go down, you're going to be paying taxes on anything above 400 Sing, which is about 300 US. In Malaysia, it's about 150 US dollars. But when you get down to the bottom there, it's very difficult to do cross-border. And the worst, of course, is in India, you're going to be paying customs and duties on every single transaction that's going through the border. So that's not a pretty picture because the customs can be quite high. The duties can be really, really prohibitive to anyone. And that's just the price. We're not even talking about the logistics yet. There are other difficulties in India that we see elsewhere around the region, but in India, they just happen to be more difficult than in most countries. So foreign ownership restrictions, requirement to set up their legal entity locally in the country with local currency, and then there's the whole aspect of the uneven application of rules. It's who you know and how you can get things done for you, which as a foreign entity is often very difficult. So in general, it is a rather difficult market. If you look at it from a local standpoint as opposed to a cross-border standpoint, there are obviously large opportunities, but even from a local standpoint, if you're one of the big domestic players there, you're going to be facing logistics issues. So in India, we actually have a logistics arm there. We have a whole fulfillment business there, and we basically see through our 1,000 couriers there that COD is very popular. So consumers like to pay for things with cash when they receive them, but what they do is they actually get the package, they open the box, they have the delivery guy just stand there and wait while they're looking through it, and then they'll actually reject 45% of the orders. And so that's a huge cost for you. And so the other risk, of course, is that if you sell anything over about 2 weeks' wage, so the average wage is about $300 per month in India. If you sell anything over about $150 US, there's a decent chance that that delivery driver, after he delivers it, takes the cash, he'll run. So that's what we found. It's very difficult to manage deliveries on the ground in India. So these are the hurdles that we face out in the marketplaces. If we look at other places, we'll end up looking at smaller countries. So all the rest of these countries have 0.2 trillion or less in retail sales for the whole country. So it's still sizable opportunities. It's just you're starting to get fragmented. Where do you want to go next? So I would summarize by saying that when you go to the smaller countries, you should get some guidance, because the ROI is very likely to be negative once you get into the smaller, fragmented countries. So the first one I would consider is South Korea. It's extremely mature. Look at the 12.9% penetration of e-commerce out of retail sales. It's very high. But the problem with South Korea is similar to Japan in that there's a lot of big players there already, and it's also got its unique aspects of its culture. So I wouldn't put that first. Hong Kong comes to mind, but Hong Kong is very odd. It's part of Greater China, and it has a very small penetration of e-commerce, mostly because it's so easy to buy anything just go down from your place and just pick it up from any mall, any street. So Hong Kong is not necessarily the best place to go. It's not proven to be at an inflection point for e-commerce. Taiwan, likewise, it's Chinese, it's Alibaba territory. It's not that you can't go there, but it's probably not the first place that I would suggest. That doesn't leave very much if you look at the countries remaining. So if you look at most of the countries remaining, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia, as far as Asia is concerned, there's a way to think about this. Don't look at it from a population standpoint. It can be very deceiving. So if you look at Indonesia compared to Australia, it's got the same retail sales numbers, around 0.2 trillion, but it's got a 10 times higher population, internet penetration is 4 times lower, and the average spend is 10 times lower per year. So what you're going to be facing is all of the wrong conditions. It's harder to find the right customers. When you find them, they're going to be spending less. So you're going to need help. It's going to be harder than what you face here in Oceania by probably 10 or 20 times harder, and the profit is lower. So just be careful if that's where you're starting. So the rest of these countries, the way to think that I would recommend thinking about this is imagine you're in World War II and you're trying to get penetration of a continent. How do they do it? The Allied forces focus on a beachhead. And the beachhead strategy has been talked about quite a bit, and it's what I recommend here. It's if you follow Geoffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm and Inside the Tornado books, you'll see that this is essentially go where you bring a lot of strength. So you can see the Allied forces coming into Normandy and Brittany. They brought a ton of force and a lot of sacrifice, of course, but they came with strength, and they used that strength to their advantage in order to, and then if you, again, apply Geoffrey Moore concept of the bowling pin, go from one pin, knock it down, get to the next one, then the next one, then the next one. So I think of it more like dominoes because you don't have a bowling ball behind you. You just have to place the dominoes perfectly and set it up so that you pick each country right. So the country that I would pick in this kind of bowling pin or domino strategy is actually Singapore and Malaysia. Singapore comes to mind. It's if you look at Forrester's e-commerce readiness index, there's across the whole world, Singapore is the only Southeast Asian country that comes up in the top 16. So that's kind of gives you a flavor for it's obviously ready. Singapore's broadband penetration rate is 104%, which is a rather odd number, penetration of households, that is. And so it's obviously ready in the most modern city sense of the world for e-commerce, but it has a lot of potential as well. Malaysia is a similar market, and if you look at it relative to what you may be familiar with, population and internet penetration-wise, you end up with a relatively similar number of target customers, and although the spend is lower, it's actually a decent number. So it's a good place to go. What we have seen in Malaysia, just to give you a flavor for some insights that we have on the ground there, is that just like in here down under, you're essentially facing a lot of merchants who are unwilling to ship cross-border to you. It's changing a lot this past few years, especially this past year, but overall in Malaysia, they're still not getting that as much as you are here. A lot of the merchants are starting to ship to Australia this past year, and probably in the next few years, they'll add Singapore and Malaysia, but it's not quite there yet. So the lack of product availability and poor variety are factors that you're familiar with. Malaysians like to shop at local sites. Again, localization is going to be a big theme throughout this whole thing. And they like to shop during their festive seasons, and they have different ones than Western countries do. So it's got to be all localized for their holidays. And lastly, blogs are a huge part of influencing them. So you have to find the experts who are writing these blogs and influence them in order to really drive your sales, because it's very localized in these markets. So Singapore and Malaysia encompass about half of the whole Southeast Asian market, which is fantastic because you only have to go to 2 places to get to half the market. And they split it about half-half each. Singapore and Malaysia are, oddly enough, about the same size, even though Singapore's population is only 5 million versus the 29 million in Malaysia. So it's a pretty good mix. Keep in mind, of course, that half of e-commerce in these countries is, just like it is here, half of it's travel-related. So if you're selling products, you're actually on the early side of the roadmap, and so you have time to differentiate. You have time to actually build your brand if you're a smaller brand. So I would circle those 2. I would assume that you're already down here. So a lot of companies have concluded the same thing that I've just analyzed here in the last 10, 15 minutes, and that is that Singapore and Malaysia are the places to start. If you look at eBay, they have been very aggressive in this region. They did a joint venture with Gmarket. Q10 is a big auction and C2C site, B2C site. So they're very aggressive. Rakuten has been very aggressive in entering Southeast Asia. They've launched their Southeast Asian sites in Singapore, in Malaysia, doing a lot of marketing. Amazon, of course, last year, they started shipping for free to Singapore, which is even better. So rather than ship it to my California home where I have to pay 9% tax, I actually ship it to Singapore. But unfortunately, Amazon only ships about 10,000 products, and most of those are books. So I still have to find some other way of getting it to me in Singapore. Alibaba also has been very aggressive. They've been aggressive not only on the actual e-commerce platforms, but also on the logistics side as well. We see that coming up. And part of that, of course, includes an investment in the company I work for now. So JD is the Amazon of China. They've also been expanding down into Southeast Asia. So these are huge companies. They did $1 billion IPO. So this is not trivial to be competing with companies of this magnitude. And I haven't even mentioned all the other ones that are coming in, like Fab from the US, coming in with a decent investment and entering the market. So what it's going to feel like is all of you have probably heard Jack Ma's quote about how he can't compete against the sharks in the oceans, but if he's a crocodile in the Yangtze River, then he can win. So he's going up against all the sharks, and what he's experiencing, and what you'll experience is that you're going to face a lot of what he's facing. And others, for example, Rocket Internet, these guys have been really investing a lot in Southeast Asia in particular, and they're not trying to make a profit. If you look at an economist's report on their IPO or prospectus, you'll find that out of all 70 companies that they run out of that particular IPO, the best one is making a loss of 35% of revenue, and the worst one is actually making a loss of 16% of its that's 16% greater than its sales itself. So they are perfectly fine getting customers and revenue, but no profit. So be careful. You're competing against some pretty big players. So with that, I've given you a lot of information, probably so much so that it can be inundating. So I'm going to try to simplify it so that you have some actionable recommendations to take away from you today. And so I would summarize it as you can go big, you can go niche, or you can go home. That's the approach I would recommend for Asia Pacific. So first, go big. This is a wave from my hometown in San Francisco Bay Area. This is Mavericks. It's 60 feet high. There's only a handful of people in the world that can do this. If you're going to do e-commerce in Asia Pacific, work with the people who know how to do it, because if you're going to go big, you can lose big. But if you do go big, you can get a lot of advantages. You can get huge discounts. You can do free shipping profitably. You can even do free returns profitably. You can get content that is highly customized for Southeast Asia. You can do lots of reviews of strollers. You could do TV. You could do something like CNET. You could do reviews that are localized because the products are different. You could spend a whole day like Gilt does in taking that one photo so that your content is just looking spectacular compared to the local content that's prepared. And you can make yourself really stand out from the crowd with really fancy marketing. So there is that opportunity. If you went big, you could also invest in your customer service. You can hire ex-ski racers to sell your skis. You could hire ex-pro cyclists to sell your bikes. And you can hire ex-military to sell sunglasses and scopes. So those are the things that you can do if you go big. It's obviously not easy to go big, so the other approach is to go niche. If you go niche, my recommendation is to alter your environment. This is a biological term, niche, and if you look at the biological definition of it, it is actually trying to do something like what beavers do in creating dams. You try to alter the environment to your favor in your market. So if you go niche, you will likely, you can either stay small forever, which may actually work for you if you have a small enough niche, or you can grow out of that. So Zulily started off by selling baby goods, flash sales in the US, of course, and they are now selling, they've expanded from, they have a product, they have a demographic, and they've expanded products by selling to that same demographic. On the other side, you have companies like Fab, who have a demographic. They started off as a gay community site, really good at design, and then they said, hey, we're just good at design. Everyone likes good design. We can sell good design. So they've expanded demographics from their products. So there's a lot of opportunity. Peapod, when I was in Chicago, living there 17 years ago, they started off selling groceries online by picking them from the local grocery stores. And they're still doing that today. That's a niche that survived nearly 20 years in the e-commerce business. If you do it right, you do it well, you can do it profitably and stick around. So if you go into the local markets here, you'll find that you'll learn a lot, and a lot of that proprietary knowledge you can use to differentiate yourself. So as an example of something, I can't tell you across all these markets that we work in, all our little tricks, it would just take too long. But as an example, we found that when we added alternative payment mechanisms like the direct debit platforms, CIMB Clicks and Maybank to You, it increased our conversion rate 70%. And even though it costs a lot to actually do those integrations, it was worth it for us. And we only needed to do it once, and once across all of our clients. If we can engage bloggers, the conversion rate goes up 68%. So overall, what we have found, and I'm going to switch over to a Levi's case study, what we have found is that you really have to localize in each market. With Levi's, they started in Asia Pacific in 2011 by opening a Tmall store. And of course, we weren't supporting them back then, but they've decided to work with us in launching their stores across Asia Pacific. We've done their store in Australia here. We launched that a few months ago. Just this past week, we've launched Levi's in Korea. So we are serving them using a Magento platform that scales very well, and we have found that all the little tricks and tools that we have on Magento have worked beautifully for us. The flexibility in being able to adapt those tools for each market and to be able to customize those with the community here, it has actually worked really, really well for us. So although we are a Magento platform, our customers, if they're not on Magento, they'll come to us and we'll still integrate them. But if they don't have one, or even if they have one in the States, we find that the ROI on Magento tends to be very high compared to the other markets and other platforms. So just as a few examples of what we do for Levi's, so you'll see that on the actual product pages, we actually will have the color swatches as you hover over them. The image will actually switch over. We will have real-time inventory showing. We will have the pricing and the sales price showing. So we do a little customization, and fortunately, Magento has been really good about supporting us. In fact, I think in this current release, they now support color swatching, which previously we did through our own customization. So the roadmap for Magento is really working to support us. We also have been doing customization on Magento for things like moving from a vertical navigation to a horizontal one, and the flexibility that Magento gives us has worked really well for us there. All of our sites are responsive designs, and we found that it works very well in Asia. You don't have to download another app, and all of the information on the web platform is completely, there's no loss of information or content from the web to the mobile. So in fact, you can even drag over on your browser, make it a smaller screen, and it'll instantly turn into a mobile site. So the mobile content will come up. So it's worked very well for us there. We've also customized the cart so that you can actually change the sizes. You can actually change the quantity while it's in your cart as opposed to going back out of your cart. And there's a lot of other fancy features that we've been adding in order to make it really solid and scalable for our clients to essentially leverage this platform across all of their deployments. So this is the Australian site. We do a lot of promotions using the Magento promotion management tools, and it's worked very well for us. Some of our promotions only go to registered users. Some are based on percentage, some are dollar discounts, and some get really fancy with combinations of all of those. So we took the same platform, and when we ported it over to the Korean site, it was relatively easy. And that's the beauty of Magento here. You can see that the content is essentially very similar content. You have a horizontal bar there, the nav bar, and even here you can see the color swatches, and the product pages are essentially the same. What we do is we sometimes customize the returns process for each market, and you'll find that that's one of the things that you really need to invest in localizing, is all the way down to the full suite of infrastructure underneath you supporting you. You have to really get that right, because that's really where you should spend your time to focus in on getting the most bang for your buck. In this case, your returns process is integrated directly to our OMS, and our customer care is instantly in real time connected to that, so that and then likewise, when it shows up in our warehouse again, everything is real time and integrated. So last slide, the way I would think about it, and if you took anything away from this, think of it as an 80-20 rule. Where do you want to be spending your time when you go into these new markets? Do you want to be spending your time on the infrastructure, or do you want to be spending your time on differentiation? And that's really where I think you should apply yourself. Think about all those niche sites that I showed you. They really, really focused on differentiation that consumers could feel. But the infrastructure itself is something that should be commoditized. It should just work. So that's really how I would recommend you think about approaching Asia Pacific. It's fragmented. It's not easy to get to all the countries at scale with the right price. So the last image is, I'll talk it through. I love pizza. I love to eat pizza. But if I had to make 1 million pizzas, I probably wouldn't do it so well. So when I think about going out and eating pizza, I usually think there's 4 ways that I can think about eating pizza and going about eating pizza. I could go and make it myself at home from scratch. I can go to a take and bake place and outsource part of it. I can have pizza delivered to me and outsource even more of it, or I can completely go out and eat at a restaurant and outsource the whole thing. So likewise, when you think about e-commerce, think in particular in these particular markets, think about how you can actually outsource so that the pizza is high quality, the e-commerce is high quality.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Tim.